Well, good morning, everyone. Perhaps we should go ahead and get started. We're getting started a little late today, so I don't want to cheat our guests of any time, but it is my pleasure to welcome to St. Paul's today and to introduce to you my dear friend, the Canon Patrick Malloy, who I met in this, when I was working in New York City in a different career, and on a personal note, he's very special to me because he's the first person who ever used the word priest in a conversation with me when I was trying to figure out what I might do with my life. So that's where our relationship began, and so you can either thank him or blame him, depending on how you feel about that. But anyway, Patrick has such a blend of wonderful experience in the church, insofar as he's been a rector and a parish priest for many years in the Diocese of Bethlehem, where his paths crossed with Dale Granfield, who I know is beloved to this community. He is a liturgical scholar, widely published on Anglican liturgy. He has a PhD in liturgical theology from Notre Dame, and he served for many years at General Theological Seminary, teaching liturgy, and even served as the academic dean for a while. And so on this occasion of Theological Education Sunday, he is the perfect person to speak to us today, and I'm thrilled. And he now serves as the Sub-Dean at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City, where I was ordained, and he presented me. And he's also the Canon for Liturgy and the Arts there. So, welcome, Patrick. I'm so glad you're here.
So Brandon tells me I don't have a lot of time, so we're going to move with great alacrity. Being this was, I do liturgy that's what my field is, my academic field is liturgy, and I said to the Dean of the Cathedral, I'm just not quite sure what I should say, talk to them about liturgy. He said, don't talk to them about liturgy, it's so boring. So I said, okay. So I thought I would talk to you about the cathedral, not knowing how many of you know much about our cathedral in New York, and also about, but really as a lead up to talking to you about a new initiative we have that's very important internationally. So that's what I want to talk to you about today. So let me just get moving right. So if you don't know much about the Cathedral of St. John the Divine was chartered in 1872. At a time when many of our dioceses didn't have cathedrals. In the beginning, the Episcopal Church tended not to have cathedrals, largely because the British, who were our ancestors, were afraid of bishops. Because in England, of course, the bishops were members of the aristocracy, and so they didn't want the bishops to get too haughty, and so we didn't tend to have cathedrals in our dioceses. But in the 19th century, we began to, in most dioceses, take a parish church and make it a cathedral. But in at least some cities, they began building cathedrals, and the most significant building was in New York City. So in 1872, what was happening in New York was there was tremendous immigration. And so the building of the cathedral and the immigration influx happened simultaneously and in a way that was quite connected. Because the cathedral was imagined as a place where all of these people coming from all over the world could come and have a home. Now, and so there's a chapel, there are 8 chapels in the cathedral for nationality groups. And the thought was they would come to the cathedral, they would have a home in one of these chapels, there'd be services in their language, and then they would finally get smart, learn English, and become Episcopalians. So this really was, that's what everyone imagined. Everyone in America would become an Episcopalian. Look how that turned out. So the cathedral was chartered. This is the beginning of this is the preamble of the charter, and the first paragraph is just legalese. But the second paragraph, I think, sort of gives a sense of the cathedral. The cathedral is the church of the Diocese of New York. As a house of prayer, it is for the use of all people who may resort thereto, especially of the Christian folk dwelling within the portion of the country covered by the spiritual jurisdiction of the Bishop of New York. And besides, it is an instrument of church unity and a center of intellectual light and leading in the spirit of Jesus Christ. It's a pretty grand vision, right? And that's what they imagined that the cathedral would be. And so then in 1892, they started to build. So it took them 20 years to get things going, and in 1892, the cornerstone was laid. For those of you who've ever been, you know that the cathedral is still being built. It will never be finished unless one of you is very wealthy and so impressed today with what I have to say that you write a check for me as you leave. But I don't think that's going to happen. So this is what the cathedral originally was meant to look like. This is not how it turned out. Well, you notice about this building, this is an old postcard. You notice that the original design was Romanesque, so you notice that all of the arches are round, and you notice that all of the tower, the central tower is heavy, so it's to be heavy and dark. The windows are rather small, as you'll notice, right? So that was the vision for the cathedral, and the people who approved this design and set out to build the cathedral, this gives you a sense of the people who are behind this project. In one of our chapels, in the anteroom to the chapel, there's a plaque that says the trustees of the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. They're calligraphed, and they would add them as they grow. They eventually stopped in the 50s, I think. But anyway, just to give you a sense of the people who are, notice there's John Jacob Astor, was one of the people who was behind the cathedral. Notice that there's Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was the president of the trustees, and they say during the building phase he would take Salvation Army style. He would go to Grand Central Terminal with a bucket and beg money to build the cathedral. Sometimes these very rich people were behind the whole thing, but it was not just them. People were sending dimes, you know, people in nursing homes would send their pennies. It was really quite a big deal. Edward Albee. So this was sort of the very wealthy and the very learned people in New York all were part of getting this cathedral off the ground. Exactly why, it's hard to say. I think it's because they wanted to show the Roman Catholics that we could do it better. And I'm really not kidding. I think that was a very important part of it. Well, they could have St. Patrick's with you know, all of their glitz, but we had St. John the Divine. And it was built at the time on what was considered to be the highest point in Manhattan. It's very high in Manhattan, way up on a hill. So if you go inside the cathedral, if you've never been there, this is one of the columns in the east. You see the Romanesque arches. You get the sense of how heavy and massive. How many of you have ever been to the cathedral? Okay, so many of you have. It's heavy and massive. And that's one of the columns in the east end of the cathedral. And that's the choir. And you get the sense of how Romanesque it is. You see the heaviness of it. You see the arches. It's a large Romanesque building. But then they fired the architects, and they decided to hire someone new. And this was at the time that Gothic was all the rage. And so this is the part of the cathedral that's in the west. And you notice it's all Gothic. Notice this is not round arches. This is not dark. This is very bright and very high. So the cathedral is evidence of, in many ways, it could be an actual ancient cathedral, because, you know, this is exactly what happened. They would start building in one style, and 200 years later the style would change. They just keep building, but in the new style. So everything became an accumulation of styles. In New York it happened just because they didn't like the architect, and they hired someone new. And who decided that he was going to change course midway. And so they built this part of the cathedral. The cathedral is a place where New York, you talk about this New York society. New York, in many ways, the cathedral is still that. I mean, just during the past year, we buried both Mayor Dinkins and his wife. That's their graves in our columbarium. Many of the greats of New York City are still buried from the cathedral, and now that we have installed 1,000 new columbarium spaces, increasingly many of them are entombed in the cathedral. So the cathedral continues to be a place that is central in the life and in the imagination of New York City. This is the chapel of St. Columba, and the reason I show you this is one of the nationality chapels. The reason I show you this is I want to point out the altarpiece, to give you a sense that the cathedral is a place where New York money and society and politics comes, but also it's a place for art. The altarpiece there is the last thing that Keith Haring ever produced. Wow. And he produced it specifically for the cathedral. So that altarpiece sits there on the altar in St. Columba's Chapel, and that's a close-up of it. So, you know, to stand at that altar beside the Eucharist is a rather amazing thing, to have this sitting in front of you. So the cathedral continues to be a place that inspires the imagination of people in New York. Here's an example. This was Christmas one year. We tend to get for Christmas, the Christmas late service, 3,000 people. The cathedral is an enormously large room. It is the length of 2 football fields. It is the largest cathedral in the world, except perhaps Liverpool. but it is certainly the largest Gothic cathedral in the world, and probably the largest cathedral in the world, and probably one of the largest 3 churches in the world, and certainly the largest church in the United States. So it's enormous. And the cathedral is a place where all kinds of things can happen. So we have peacocks on our property. That's our white peacock. I actually took that picture of the peacock. So the cathedral is a place where all sorts of things happen that one would not expect. Grand and important things. So what that means for this, and this is where we're leading. You know, there are things that are possible at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine that are not possible anyplace else. And I really think that's literally true. I think that things can happen there that certainly can happen in no other church that I know of. And because it's a church, things can happen there that couldn't happen, for example, at Carnegie Hall. It's one of those spaces that just calls for amazing things to happen in it. And many of you probably know things like our famous St. Francis Day celebration. Do you know about that? You know, the elephants and the giraffes, you know, all of that. So much so that, you know, people now, the business of bringing your pets to church on St. Francis Day, but that really began at St. John's. I mean, people always celebrated St. Francis Day, but the business of bringing animals, and including, you know, exotic animals into the church began with us. Or, you know, so many things that people just take for granted now really started at St. John the Divine, because St. John the Divine is a place where things really can happen. And it's about this notion of possibility, where I'd like to now hinge into a project that I'd like to talk to you about. And I'd like to be a little bit autobiographical, if you don't mind. So, when I was doing my doctorate, I did a doctorate at Notre Dame, as Brendan said. I was in Europe, and I did a Europass. Isn't that what everyone does, right? You did a Europass. I was actually in England, but I got a Europass, and I was young and ridiculous, and I took off across Europe, and I ended up in Paris. Now, if there's anything, even in the 1980s, Christianity in France was pretty dead. You know, in Europe in general, Christianity was dead. In France in particular, Christianity was dead. And I was walking through Le Marais. I don't know how many of you know Paris. And all these people were just streaming into this church. And I thought, well, that's odd. I thought that they must have converted it into an art gallery, you know? I have to go in and see what avant-garde exhibit is in there today. So I went in, and it wasn't. It was a church. Saint-Gervais was what it was. And it turns out that this bunch of people had gone to the Archbishop of Paris, the Roman Catholic Archbishop, and told him that if he would give them the church, which was closed, it was derelict, if he would just let them have it, they would bring it back to life. So they established a brand new monastic community. And the monastic community was made up of both men and women, who all of whom had jobs, real jobs, half-time, and the other half of the time they lived together and attended the church and prayed together. And the people of Paris simply couldn't believe it. They were absolutely spellbound by it. And that church was filled with people coming to pray with these people 3 times a day, every day of the week. And I remember being so impossibly moved by it and saying to look, what happened in Europe is now happening in the United States. I mean, you know, religion is dying. And I thought to myself, this is the future. It's places like this that are going to save Christianity. And I tucked that away in the back of my mind. The community is called the Fraternity of Jerusalem. They now have grown to be so large that they actually own Mont Saint-Michel. They've taken over Mont Saint-Michel. So the motto of their community is, in the heart of God, in the heart of the city. Which I just thought was the most gorgeous thing, in the heart of God, in the heart of the city. So I tucked that away in the back of my mind. But I thought to myself a lot, the United States needs something like this. And then I got a job at St. John the Divine. And that's why I talk about possibility. That St. John the Divine is a place of incredible possibility. So, St. John the Divine is also a place where it takes the society seriously. So I'm going to get to the possibility in a minute. But I want to talk a minute about the society in which we find ourselves. Right now we find ourselves in a situation, a painful situation, where increasingly in society, the public square is sort of drained of ethics and drained of spirituality. And we see this in business, and we see this in politics. God, I mean, can you believe the lack of morality in politics? I mean, it's absolutely horrifying. The total disregard for truth is mind-boggling. And I came across this, that the Archbishop of Canterbury was going to invite financiers to come and live with him in a monastic community. Literally, come and live with him. And this was in the Financial Times of London. So I thought, well, now, isn't that interesting? I wonder if this is anything like what they're doing in Paris. I wonder if this is the Anglican version of what happened in Paris. So I decided that I had to check this out, because I thought, if there's any place that this could happen in the United States, it's at St. John of the Vine, and I work there now. It's a place of tremendous possibility. So I went to Lambeth Palace. Lambeth Palace is the home of the Archbishop of Canterbury in London. And this is the door. You can see how old it is because of how little the door is. The big front door. So on the 18th of May, 2018, off I went to London to Lambeth Palace to see this thing that was happening. I was like the Magi. We have come to see this thing that is happening. So I wanted to go to Lambeth Palace to see what had happened. So I went to Lambeth Palace. That's what it looks like. Doesn't this look like England? Honest to God, right? Look at that. Now where could that be but England? Right? So I go to Lambeth Palace to actually see what is happening there. And this is what's happening there. The Archbishop has gathered in his house about 20 young people from all over the world, of every imaginable Christian denomination, to come and live together for a year in an intense, very intense monastic life. And his hope was that these young people would come, 21 to 35, they would come and live there for these 10 months. And then they wouldn't become priests or monks or nuns or any of them. They wouldn't, in other words, they'd get a real job. And they would go back to their law practices, or their surgeries, or their whatever they did. But they would go back taking with them this deep well of spirituality that could help to bring some kind of writing to how far off course the society would go. So these young people live intensely together. So intensely together, I couldn't bear it, frankly. I could not, I'm rather introverted. I would find this incredible kind of intense community to be difficult. But they cook for one another. They're not allowed to do their own laundry. They have to do one another's laundry. They live in a profoundly communal way. They work with the most poor and troubled people in London. This is an example of them, the young man on, let's see, I guess your left clearly has Downs, and so they work with people who have developmental disabilities, physical disabilities. They work with homeless people. They work with drug-addicted, pregnant, single women. They work in cancer hospitals. So they work with the most needy people in London. They study intensely. They have scholars from all over the world come and teach them theology and the social sciences. And what they do most is they pray. It's amazing. It is amazing to witness this. That these kids, 21 to 35, give up a year of their lives and spend 14 hours every day in silence. That they gather and pray so intensely for a whole year of their life. It is them. It is a thing to behold. That's the room where they pray. That's their chapel what was probably a 12th century basement in the abbot's palace, or in the archbishop's palace. So I went to chapel the first day, and morning prayer, just to sit with them. And after morning prayer, who walks up to me but Justin Malloy, the Archbishop of Canterbury, said, you're the one from New York, aren't you? And I said, I am, Archbishop. And he said, well, look, I need to talk to you. So we stood right there and talked for an hour. And the next day, he came back to morning prayer. And every day that I was there, the same thing happened. And we talked about what was happening in his basement. And he said to me at the end of, I can sum up everything he said to me in 2 sentences. He said, I want you to go back to New York and do this. You need to do in New York what we're doing here in London. Because he said, you need to do this for the sake of the Anglican communion, and this is how ecumenical relationships will be renewed. Because ecumenical relationships right now are not in good shape. There was a time when we Christians across denominational lines talked a lot and had dreams of coming back together, and that's gone very cold. And he said, I need you to go back and do this in New York for the sake of the communion and for the sake of ecumenical relations. And he said, and you cannot do this without Sheminef. Now, a word about Sheminef. Sheminef is an ecumenical religious community that is under the auspices of the Bishop of Rome. It's not a Roman Catholic community. It's an ecumenical community, but it includes Roman Catholic priests. And so by their canonical standards, they can't belong to it unless it's a Roman Catholic organization. So this is a religious order. It's about 30 years old and has 3,000 members. And it's men and women of all denominations and married couples. So, my head was swimming, and I got a call from Sheminef. They called me. And they said, the Archbishop says you'd like to do New York what we're doing here in London. And I said, we would actually. They said, we want to come and do this with you. The people from France, they called me from France, like the Coneheads. We are from France. They called me from France to come in to see if they could come and do this. And so we're going to do it. So why are we going to do it? This is the religious makeup of the population right in 2019, the last time we have figures. So 32% are members of mainline Christian churches, like us. 27% are evangelicals, not like us. 18% are Romans, and 24% are nuns. And nuns is a category that's evolved, meaning people have no religion, right? It's just, sociologists use that term, nuns. So 24% of the population has no religion. But here's what's interesting about that. So we could also might call them seekers, because that says these nuns, it's not like they really don't have any religion, they just don't know anything. They just have no grounding. They'd love to have a religion, I think. I want to look at how many. In 1972, 6% of the population said they had no religion, nuns. So 6% in 1972. Now notice, the next number there on the chart is 2017. So how much is that, 40 years? 45 years? 45 years, right? Okay. 45 years later, the number is at more than double that. It's at 14. See that? Now notice it took 45 years for that jump. 45 years, right? Between 2017 and 2019, it's 24%. So the number of people falling away or never having, is the truth, never having any Christian religion is increasing. It is increasing very quickly in the United States, and it's only going to get more. You can see that's, Gladwell's The Tipping Point. I don't know how many of you read that. That patterns go that way. You think that things go like this, but they don't. They go like this. And they go slow, so all of a sudden there's a tipping point and everything accelerates. So we're in a place where by the time most of us are dead, there will be not many believers left. So why would we want to do something like what we're planning to do at the Cathedral? Because people are hungry for religion. They are hungry for deep spirituality. and they don't have it. And we have to give it to them. We have to give them a vision that there is something more possible in life than just doing what they're doing. Not because we think we're better than them, but because we care about them. And because we believe what we've got is valuable, and we want to see it survive. So, that's 2019. And just to show you how this is happening in other places in informal ways, I just found this on Facebook. There's a group in Grand Rapids, Michigan called Sisters and Seekers. And these nuns let these young women come and live with them because the young women feel lost. And the nuns let them come and live with them to see maybe they can find meaning there. It's not so different than what we intend to do at St. John the Divine. It's also true, here we see the Holy Father and the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Ecumenical Patriarch all together. Ecumenical relationships are in big trouble. There's a great desire for, especially the three traditional historic religions to come back, historic Christian traditions to come back together. But that's grown rather cold. And so another one of the whys is we need, remember the Cathedral's charter to be a source of church unity? Do you remember that was in the Preamble? It's part of our very need, our goal in life to bring the Christian churches into some kind of communion with one another. And so first of all, by bringing a Roman Catholic religious community to live on our property, could you imagine such a thing? That beginning this July, there will be one of the sisters is an Anglican, a Roman Catholic priest, and the third, we don't know who she's going to be yet. It's going to be 2 women and a man, are going to be living on our property and probably in my apartment. I'm moving out. But I think they're going to move into my apartment, but I'm definitely moving out. So the other why is we need to begin to make a stand for Christian unity again. So the Archbishop of Canterbury is firmly behind this. This is the letter of support from our presiding bishop, Michael Curry. We also have a letter now in the mail from the Pope, who has taken note of this, thinking it's this important. Actually, he does know about it because one of the members of Shemanef is his translator. So he works, but also the person who's going to write the letter is a man named Cardinal Koch, who's the head of the Vatican Office for Ecumenical Relations. That letter's in the mail. So, why is because we want to respond to the needs of the times. And what are the needs of the times? That there are people who are seeking, who don't have any idea what to do. And I will tell you something, beloved brothers and sisters, and this is a conviction of mine. One of the reasons things like QAnon arise is because people are deep for a religion. And if they don't get it with us, they'll get it from Q. Q is a religious figure who has created a religion. It gives people a myth to believe in. And that's what we can offer people. We can offer people a myth that's true. So there's seekers. To bring ethics back into the public square, to get these people with us for 10 months, and then to send them back to politics, and send them back to medicine, and send them back to retail, and send them back to whatever they do, send them back, grounded deeply in prayer and spirituality and education and all of those things. And have a live together. To restore some kind of an ecumenical dialogue in the United States. To show the importance of service, because at Lambeth Palace, they live together 7 days a week, but 2 of those days they're out in London doing this work. So part of the idea too is that these young people would be deeply immersed in service projects, at least two days out of every 7. And in general, modeling for people a better way. To say to people who come to the cathedral, my God, look at those 10, 15 young people, they actually can live together. There's young men and young women, there's Mennonites and Pentecostals and Anglicans and Lutherans and Greek Orthodox from all over. And somehow, they can actually live together. And to model that the way that what we're seeing today in our society, there is a better way. And that's our projected timeline, but we don't have to do that because you probably have questions. But Shemanef is arriving in 6 months, so that's good. And that's how much money we need, but that's another matter. So, unless you want to see me at the door. First of all, someone needs to give me the check to finish the building. And someone else needs to give me the check to fund this program. Other than that, you have no responsibilities. So that is, and we're going to call it the community at the crossing. At Lambeth Palace, it's called the Community of St. Anselm, who was an Archbishop of Canterbury. We spent years trying to figure out what to call this thing. I wanted them to call it the Community of St. Patrick, but they wouldn't listen to me. And eventually we decided, it just came to us like as in a dream, Community at the Crossing, because in the cathedral, the place where the transepts and the nave meets is called the Crossing. And then we said, but this is kind of, New York is the crossroads of the world, right. And we are at a crossroads in history. And these young people will come up at a place where they'll come to this thing and do it, and then they'll cross over. So we're calling it the Community at the Crossing. So that's what's happening at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City. So, what do you think?
I think you should speed it up.
I don't talk fast enough? Mr. Sloan says I don't speak fast enough. Oh, okay. So, you know, truthfully, a lot of it is money. This is going to cost an enormous amount of money. And visas. Getting the people, people who show enough for English and French, the ones that are coming, or maybe a Hungarian. And it's hard to get people into the country right now. So, sir.
I have a question for you. I spent a lot of time at St. John Divine in my younger years and was on committees.
Oh.
Paul Gore and
Yeah.
Walter Dennis, and I was all part of the crowd I was in.
Yeah.
In the 70s, there was a great, I think it was the 70s, there was a period of time when they were making an effort to complete the cathedral, which has been an unfinished project, and the prospect is it will continue that way, unlike the Washington Cathedral, forever. They brought in artisans from Europe for the stonework, or starting on the and then they stopped. Because of, you might say, political sentiment within the church, not outside the church. But why should we put money into edifice? It should be for the people.
Yeah.
So the effort stopped, never to be resumed. Now, the question always has been in my mind, there's a lot of money in New York, a tremendous amount, more made every day. Investment banking, private equity, hedge fund guys, a lot of whom, believe it or not, are Episcopalians. I don't know what the development, I mean, this might be a little bit not spiritual, but going towards a reality here, how do you finish it all? It's nice to go out and ask for a couple of bucks here, a couple of bucks there, but there's some real money there. Is there a serious development effort organized just to go for it and finish it off, you know?
Well, I think what we would find is actually, I think there's less of that kind of money among the Episcopal Church now than there used to be. I think that, you know, the days of the Astors, I think, are over. And I think that I'm not so sure there is that kind of money among church Episcopalians anymore. So that's one thing. The other thing, too, is it really is, well, just a couple of things. It isn't largely a matter of money. I mean, what had to happen when during the days of Paul Moore and Walter Dennis was they actually had to bring in stone carvers from Europe, build a stone yard where there's now an apartment building, and then teach kids from the neighborhood, from Harlem mostly, how to do this unbelievable. There's something about the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. Again, a lot of you have been there. The Cathedral of St. John the Divine is an actual medieval building, not in terms of its age, but in terms of its construction. It does not have a steel frame. It is stone on stone, which means that you can't just, you know, you could, if you'll report concrete, like Grace Cathedral in San Francisco, it's easy. But that's not what it is. So if you're going to do anything, you have to train stone carvers, and then you have to create a stone factory where all of this work is done. So part of it is that. Part of it is that there are no artisans, they'd have to start from scratch. But really, it's about money. But there is another matter now too. The whole property has been landmarked. And what that means is the oldest building on the property is a building called the town property. It was an orphanage. It was there when the cathedral started. The idea was that it would be torn down eventually so that the cathedral transept could go through it. It now cannot be torn down, which means because the whole property is landmarked, which means literally the cathedral cannot be finished without the permission of New York City, and they probably wouldn't give it. So, ma'am. No, this lady was first. Yeah.
All through your presentation, you didn't mention community.
Community?
No, wait, let me finish.
I didn't hear your word.
Community.
Oh,
Okay, you did mention it several times at sort of when you were winding up. To me, I'm a social historian by training. To me, the nuns are seeking community.
Yeah.
And if you want to define that as religious affiliation, I'm not sure that that's what those who are seeking community are seeking. That said, I think one can find community in religious affiliation. So how are you addressing that very real cognitive disconnect? At least it's cognitive disconnect for me.
well, the thing is, there are lots, you're right. I mean, people find community in all kinds of ways. And religion is only one of those kinds.
QAnon you brought up, yes.
Right, QAnon. But QAnon is really a quasi-religion.
Yeah.
But people are finding community elsewhere. So I had someone tell me once that the most important thing in her life is Soul Cycle, because it was community. So you're absolutely right. I'm not saying, so that the first thing is, I'm not saying everyone will find that community with this. All I'm saying is one of the ways that people do find community is in religious community. Second of all, I think that people can apply to do this program who are true seekers, like who really do not have necessarily a firmly formed Christian identity. But they at least have to want to explore having a Christian identity. So, there are lots of ways you can, as you said, you can find community, but this is a very particular thing. I think that, I did speak about how the young people at Lambeth Palace live in an intense community life. And then that becomes sort of a model for other people, as well as a model for them as they move into the culture. So I think that the notion of community runs through this entirely. It's just, as you said, everyone doesn't find that community in religion, but I do think that seekers are looking for some kind of community, and for many of them, it is a spiritual community. So that's right. And you were next.
Well, my question, I'm relating this to working in development. A person, head of an entrepreneur program, it was rotating head, asked in front of the board what the program needed, and he said, we need to teach ethics. But he acknowledged then that money is an easy thing to quantify and evaluate. That's why we teach business that way, in his mind. And he said, but I don't know what the ethical basis in reality would be to do this. So that's my question, because we have a world that's not just Christian anymore,
Right.
but there are ethics that we might, so how do we plumb the depth of what ethics we are looking for, and how do we get there?
Well, I think my answer is not that different than my answer to the other questioner. I think that we can only do one thing, and for us it would be, we would talk about Christian ethics, but I think we would also understand that Christian ethics is not the only form of ethics. But and maybe I'm a bit cynical. I just think that, I believe that people are good and people are flawed. And I believe that left to our own devices, we do a lot of good things, a lot of bad things. And I think that having some sort of an overarching ethical system that informs your life is something that is not yours, but that you partake in with other people. It's a shared ethical system. I think gives you a place to stand when you dialogue with other people. So, for example, I'll give you an example, another autobiographical example. I am we're having a big service in the memory of Archbishop Tutu on next Sunday night, and we're having an imam pray and a rabbi pray. I did not have any idea of the antipathy of a lot of Judaism in the United States against Archbishop Tutu. And it took me, I've been working to find a rabbi to pray at this thing for a month. And finally, on Friday, I found a rabbi. And he and I had the most wonderful conversation. But the point of this was, what we realized was, he doesn't have to pray like a Christian to pray with us. But we don't have to pretend that we're not a Christian church. And so he knows what we're doing is a Christian service at which he's going to be asked to pray like a Jew. And what that does is, and we talked then about ecumenical interreligious dialogue, and he said, real dialogue can only happen if the people in the dialogue have a position. And so I think to say, I have a Christian ethical position is not in any way to denigrate your Muslim ethical position, but it's to say, we can talk now because I have something to talk about. So I think what ethics, to some extent, I think people just have to have an ethical footing. Right now, again, I don't know what life is like for you. It seems to me there is no ethical footing in a lot of business and politics right now. It's not that I don't agree with the ethical policies, there just aren't any. So, Father.
Does this have anything to do with the worker priest movement?
No, but what
Can
it does.
you repeat the question?
Oh yeah, this doesn't have anything to do with the worker priest movement. There was a movement in the mid 20th century of Roman Catholic priests, especially in France, who actually had real jobs, like real people. Like they worked more than one day a week, like we priests do. The worker priest movement. This really doesn't have anything to do with that. But what it does do is it does do the same thing insofar as it puts people of ethics and of conscious ethics into business situations, into professional situations. It does do that. Sir, let me just make sure I'm watching my time. Oh, we have 5 minutes, sir.
Historically, St. John's has had programs that have been community-based outreach, particularly in terms of their drug treatment program and the jazz concerts, as sort of two extremes. What you're talking about, as I'm hearing it, is you're reaching out to the intellectually elite and ignoring the people of the streets, the people who currently have a drug problem, the people who are living in the city. And I'm struggling with your elitism associated with the program that you're projecting.
Well, I don't know that we ever had drug treatment programs. We feed 400 people every Sunday. Half of the children in our school go at a tremendously reduced rate. We currently have vaccination and COVID testing on our property. I think the Cathedral, we have on Sunday afternoon services for the Latino folks in our neighborhood. So, I don't think it's a matter of either or. I think this program is in some sense elitist, but not elitist in the negative. I mean, for example, these young people don't have to have any money to come to this. And part of the reason we have to raise money is because we want them to be able to come free. We figure it's going to cost $47,000 a person a year to do this. I mean, this is New York City. I mean, New York City is so incredibly, it's brand